Alright, y'all, before we get too far into our sourdough journey, I wanted to discuss different types of flours because it's super important to use the right kind of flour for your starter and especially for when you go to make bread loaves. You can see that we have a couple different kinds here. This isn't every type of flour you can buy, but it's the most prominent type of flours you're going to find in the store. We have bread flour, unbleached all-purpose, bleached all-purpose, store brand. This is cake flour, and then we have dark rye flour. So the two main flours we're going to use are going to be bread and all-purpose. As I said before, I like to feed with all-purpose. It's a cheaper option. You get pretty similar results as you would with bread, but especially for feeding. Feeding is something you're going to do, multiple times a week, maybe even every day. It's going to be the most cost-effective way to feed your starter, and it doesn't degrade your starter by any means. Your starter is going to be perfectly fine to use with all-purpose flour. Now, the only difference between these two is that all-purpose has a lower protein content than bread flour. So when you buy, let's say, not Pillsbury, but King Arthur brand bread flour, it comes in a blue bag, and at the very top right here, you're going to see where it says, I think it says either 11.7 or maybe even 12.1. I can't remember exactly what it says. But that's the percentage of protein in the flour, and that's what makes the flour stronger. And that strength is what's going to build your gluten, but also hold your surface tension so that when you go to dump your bread onto your Dutch oven, it's not just going to turn into a flat splat. It's going to keep that nice ball shape, and when you score it, it's not going to completely deflate. So like I said, I usually feed with all-purpose. I prefer unbleached all-purpose. I don't really love bleached flour, but when I'm buying it in bulk, a lot of times it comes bleached. You get what you get. It doesn't make a huge difference in baking. I just prefer unbleached everything. And then your bread flour, just a higher protein content. And I actually wanted to show you, they look pretty similar. I don't know if you can see that. No, you sure can't. So it's a little bit of bread flour as I make a mess on my clean floor. Versus your all-purpose flour. Really, the lower protein content you go to, the more clumpy your flour is going to be. The more likely you're going to want to sift your flour. For bread, we don't have to sift. You want to sift for cakes and things of that nature. That's why when we get further down the cake flour, you always sift it. I actually just discovered, I was just working with this a few weeks ago, and this particular store brand, sorry, Piggly Wiggly, I couldn't find it anywhere on the bag or online, but it must have a lower protein content than a regular all-purpose flour because I made bread with it and it just was like slop. Like I had to add so much extra flour, and you're going to see right now when I show it to you how absolutely clumpy this is. Like look at this, it's holding its clumps. It's holding these giant clump balls, and it doesn't just come apart in my hand like it normally would. So I don't know if they're just what they're doing over there at their store brand, but I do not recommend the Piggly Wiggly brand for bread at all. For bread in any way, shape, or form. Don't even feed your starter with this because my starter went from the thickness that I like to just absolute like water almost, like soup. The one store brand I will recommend is I actually use Walmart brand flour and bread flour quite often. It's more cost effective. You can buy a 25-pound bag of all-purpose flour and like a $4 bag of bread flour in the Great Value brand. And it is actually very cost effective, and it works super well. To be honest with you though, the bread flour is a little bit cheaper than like the Pillsbury unbleached. I think it's $1 cheaper. But there's not really a huge difference in the Walmart bread flour versus like an on-brand all-purpose flour. They're basically the same. So this is cake flour. This is actually the Pura Snow cake flour, like the commercial cake flour that you get. I don't know if you can see, it's so much finer. Like it feels almost like powdered sugar without the sugar in it. It's very, very soft. It's very, very light, and it has a very, very low protein content. So when we're talking about cake flour, I think we're talking about 5 to 6% protein content versus the 11 to 12 that you'll get with a bread flour. So again, I do not recommend cake flour for feeding your starter. Definitely not for making loaves. If that's all you have, just don't make bread. And then lastly, we have some stone ground rye flour. Obviously there's going to be a huge difference with this because it's a ground whole grain here. And you can kind of see it's a little bit gritty, which is great. Like if you're going to make rye bread, like this is what you want to make it with. Another thing this is good for is that if you're noticing that your bread if you're letting your bread ferment for a long time, but you're not getting that sourness that you want, a good option is to do a couple of feedings with some rye flour or even whole wheat flour. And that will help with getting the sourness the sour taste that you're looking for into your bread. I'm honestly not really sure of the exact chemical makeup or chemical reactions that are taking place to help make this a reality, but I do know that I have done it before and it works really well. It does give your bread a very different texture, especially if you're going to use like a majority percentage of dark rye flour in your bread. It's going to be very, very dense. It's going to be like bread that you would find in Eastern Europe because it's very dense, very heavy. I don't recommend making a whole loaf with just dark rye flour or any rye flour. You want to kind of mix it between dark rye and then like all purpose. So that way you get a little bit of that fluffiness and it's not just like a big compacted dense loaf of bread. But yeah, these are a few different flours that I have here in my kitchen that I use. I hope this was a little bit informative, but yeah, we just wanted to talk about some protein content of all of our different flours, do's and don'ts. Really, you just want to stick with all-purpose and bread if you can help it, and then if you need a little sourness boost, maybe a little bit of this rye flour or some whole wheat. But we will see you next time for some loaf making.